Shymkent, South Kazakhstan, the country's third largest city, home to 600,000 people and a heavy industry in decline. I have lived and worked in Kazakhstan for 5 years. It's a country rich in resources, but it endured decades of environmental abuse when it was part of the Soviet Union. I've heard that globalized companies have taken over the heavy industry and are still using its cities as dumping grounds. Jeff is a chemical engineer who has lived and worked in Shymkent for a number of years. He was keen to show me what 80 years of pollution has done to the earth here.
This is the location we took the sample from. Took it out of the soil. Of course, I was wearing my gloves. Took the sample up, bagged it. When I got the results back, that was when I got the shock.
Jeff was asked to help in a local regeneration project. Before they built a new playground, he decided to take a soil sample.
See, with arsenic, the maximum limit is 2, so that is 70, so you're 30 times the legal limit. You've got lead, the legal limit is 30 parts per million, and there we find it to be well over 2,000 parts per million. That's 70 times the legal limit. The cadmium here is 49, so you're 10 times the legal limit. These are horrendous poisons which are in very high concentrations, almost that you could mine for. This used to be a children's kindergarten. Can you imagine the children who used to play here and the poisoning they suffered?
Shymkent is one of the most polluted places on the planet. Jeff took me to see one of the main causes of all that pollution, this lead smelter which was built in 1934.
We're looking over here at the complex of the lead smelter of Shymkent. This was one of the major factories of the former Soviet Union in terms of supply of lead products, particularly bullets. 3 out of 4 bullets fired by the Red Army in the Second World War were made here.
The aging smelter laboured on through the Soviet Union's collapse and into the 21st century.
You can see you've got the river down the middle, and on the other side the residential area is encroached right up to the limits of the lead smelter. You've got all new accommodation built around here, including families. We're looking down there and we can see maybe 20 children playing down there. When the smelter was working, the fumes were coming out and you could taste the grit between your teeth.
The smelter hasn't operated for 18 months, but in the suburb that has grown up around it, people are still being poisoned. The worst affected are children. Levels of lead in the soil are so high that when children play outside, they inevitably ingest some of the toxins. Their developing organs are especially vulnerable. According to a study by the International Task Force for Children's Environmental Health, up to 100,000 children may have been poisoned. Lead poisoning can have terrible effects on growth and the intellect. In 2012, a team of medical researchers tested for lead contamination in the soil and in people's blood.
Состояние воздуха, чем люди дышат. Вот это шымкентская пыль. Когда завод работает, выделяется пыль.
One of the researchers was Gulzhan Dosanova.
Исследования показали, что у 52% детей идет превышение ПДК по свинцу. То есть установлено, что это во всех других районах брать по республике, его нет, свинца в крови.
I showed a lead expert in the UK the research that has been done on the poisoning in Shymkent.
Some of the lead levels that have been found in this city were really quite high and are of really quite great concern for the health of these children. You might expect that there'd be a greater prevalence of babies being born preterm. They might have slightly lower birth weights than you'd expect, and some of those growth effects would be continued so that the children were born small and would possibly stay small. There might also be effects on IQ and school performance. They might have changes in behaviour, so they might be more hyperactive, and all of these factors would contribute to a reduction in their potential.
Kazakhstan is the cheapest part of town. It grew up over recent years as a place for people to build family houses where the land is affordable. Thousands of families have made it their home. But this suburb is right by the smelter. Salima is a retired school teacher. When she moved here to teach in the 1970s, she noticed something about the children in Shymkent.
Они должны грамотнее быть, чем те дети. Нет, наоборот, слабые они, на здоровье слабые, умственно отсталые. Отсталых детей много здесь.
Salima took us to meet some of the many families she knows with sick children. Norbek lives up the road. He's very small for an 11-year-old. His aunt helps with his care.
Ребенок не растет, ему 11 лет. Уже сверстники выше его и хорошо думают, играются, а он не хочет это самое, играет. Он быстро устает, не любит шумные сиделки, не любит, он любит тишину просто. Играется и судороги у него. Он просто, если вот кто-нибудь обидит его, он все вот разозлится и все.
Almost next door are the Tursunov brothers. This is Malik on the right.
Ему ничего не нравится.
В школе он общается, но сразу обижается. Постоянно настроение не бывает, как здоровый ребенок.
And just a short walk from the Tursunovs, the families of Daria and Juldizai agreed to meet us. The cousins have learning difficulties, amongst other problems.
Она поздно ходила, там столько получила массаж. Все это в мозгу мне сказали там, внутри. Мы ничего не можем, просто сейчас получаем каждые 3 месяца лечения. Просто так, не знаю, в будущем, я боюсь.
How is Juldiz, how's she getting on at school?
Оценки плохие, у нас запоминаемость трудная, трудно запоминает и памяти нету, забудет все.
Сейчас незаметно, там что творится, не знаем, да? Сколько раз сними, но там внутри их голову.
Every child we met had been given multiple diagnoses, but many of their symptoms could indicate lead poisoning.
Свинцовый завод имени Калинина, детище первых пятилеток. Он вступил в строй 20 лет назад.
The Soviet Empire glorified heavy industry, and the Shymkent lead smelter was part of that.
Шымкентский свинцовый завод – один из ярких примеров могучего роста социалистической индустрии, ведущей силы в народном хозяйстве.
But no one cared much for the environment. Pollution from the smelter continued until 2008, when the plant was shut down. But suddenly, in 2010, the blast furnaces fired up again.
До июля нынешнего года завод простаивал в течение 2 последних лет. С приходом к оперативному управлению Южполиметаллом корпорации «Казахмыс» возобновился выпуск традиционной продукции.
I was shocked to watch the television to see that the lead smelter, which was the cause of all this contamination, was actually starting up again. What I saw was a company which I hadn't heard of at that stage called Kazakhmys. I saw the directors acknowledging, talking about the throughputs that there were going to be through the lead smelter.
У нас задача полностью загрузить завод и выйти хотя бы на 32 тысячи тонн стабильного производства.
Then I saw the directors of Kazakhmys saying, we are now in charge of the lead smelter, we are now in control of management and operation.
Было принято решение, что корпорация «Казахмыс» сама возьмет на себя оперативное руководство производством и финансовой деятельностью.
And then I saw that the man who is the CEO of Kazakhmys in Kazakhstan, in answer to a question from the regional governor about what are you going to do about the environment, the CEO of Kazakhmys answered him, that's for the future, we're not going to do it yet.
Решаемый вопрос, мой дорогой.
That to me was shocking.
So what is Kazakhmys?
Ты всегда был нашим домом, Kazakhmys.
Kazakhmys is the largest copper producer in Kazakhstan. It has 16 mines. It also produces zinc, silver and gold, and has a market capitalization worth $6 billion. The company wouldn't tell us exactly what they were putting through the smelter in Shymkent, but we know from an official Kazakhmys report that some of it was highly toxic lead dust, waste from their other operations. It contained arsenic, cadmium and antimony, but it also contained lead and other valuable metals that the company wished to recover. This was a major operation. One of the directors claimed they could produce 250 tons every 3 days. Yet the local sanitary department never gave it a license to operate. So what was it like for people in Shymkent living near the smelter when the Kazakhmys operation was running? Local news reported residents waking up to a black cloud one day.
Смог настоящий черный. Я не поняла, а потом смотрю, у меня горло стало першить. Я зашла домой и все окна закрыла.
Upsets or uncontrolled emissions, like this one coming from the building itself, were recorded on numerous occasions. People claimed it happened when monitors weren't looking. Documents obtained from the Kazakh Environment Ministry show that the smelter had a permit to emit 28 tons of lead a year, and that levels were regularly exceeded. The smelter was fined on several occasions. But this isn't a hangover from the Soviet era. Kazakhmys is a British company. This is their headquarters in London. British law would have required Kazakhmys to look at its environmental impact before the operation was undertaken. That environmental assessment was never done. Vladimir Kim, the top shareholder of Kazakhmys, speaking at an annual general meeting in 2011, distanced his company from the operation of the lead smelter.
Shymkent, the lead plant, does not belong to Kazakhmys. The only connection between Kazakhmys and this plant that we are delivering there, the lead dust.
This is the annual report that came out after that denial that Kazakhmys controlled the lead smelter. And in these pages, there's no mention of any controlling operation at Shymkent, no mention of any environmental impact assessment, and no mention to shareholders of any liabilities or earnings that perhaps they ought to have known about. But denying they were running the plant is directly contradicted by the news footage from its reopening in 2010. Here is the Kazakhmys executive director of metallurgy, Yerzhan Ospanov.
Поэтому было принято решение, что корпорация Kazakhmys сама возьмет на себя оперативное руководство производством и финансовой деятельностью во избежание непроизводственных расходов для получения максимальной прибыли.
And here's Mr. Duisengali Baigwatov, a long-time Kazakhmys employee, dressed in his Kazakhmys overalls, now manager of the smelter, listing the precious metals recovered. We approached Kazakhmys to ask them about this contradiction. We received an email from their head of communications, John Smelt. This is what he says. The lead plant at Shymkent started operating in 1934. That Kazakhmys has never owned or operated the plant, but we have supplied material to it for relatively brief periods. The supply was partly at government request in order to support employment. We have not sent any material there since mid-2012, and we believe the plant has now closed. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, Kazakhmys says it wasn't running the plant. The operating company was something called Amega Trading. But in Kazakhstan's commercial capital Almaty, we found a strange connection between Amega Trading and Kazakhmys. Now we've done a little digging and we found on a company's register that Amega Trading actually has an address here in Almaty. And the director of the company is a Mrs. Natalia Ivashina. Now what's interesting about this address is that it appears that the building is owned by a senior employee at Kazakhmys. So I'm hoping now that we might be able to find Mrs. Ivashina at this address, 170 Tchaikovskaya Street, and try to ask her about the relationship between Kazakhmys and Amega Trading. Могу я говорить с директором Omega Trading?
Как вас представить?
Меня зовут Робин. Робин Форестер. Forestier. This is the place. No sign for Omega Trading, though. Just Kazakhmys Maintenance Department. Oh, and something for a company called Vertex. That's a company owned by a Mr. Vladimir Jumanbayev. He's a big cheese at Kazakhmys. He's their commercial director. Здравствуйте. А вы...
Наталья, вы ко мне?
Да, извините. Я Робин Форестер. Мы хотели встретиться с вами, потому что мы хотели узнать, если вы существуете, если у вас отношения между Kazakhmys и Omega Trading.
Ну, рабочие отношения, конечно, есть.
Да. Здравствуйте, Робин Форестер. Мы сделаем репортаж насчет Kazakhmys. Здесь находится Kazakhmys тоже, да? В этом здании.
На 5-м этаже. Kazakhmys сервис. Как такового мы никакого отношения к корпорации Kazakhmys не имеем. У нас есть контракт, который имеется и у свинцового завода, и у корпорации Kazakhmys, да, где мы являемся сторонами по контракту. То есть Kazakhmys, Omega Trading и сам Шымкентский свинцовый завод.
Понятно. Ну это как сказать на русском? Coincidence. Вы говорите по-английски?
Нет.
Что директор для этого здания, вы знаете ее?
Самого Vertex Holding?
Да.
Jumanbayev?
Это Jumanbayev, да? И он, конечно, большой директор в Kazakhmys. Да?
Ну да, да.
Тогда почему вы здесь работаете?
Мы здесь снимаем помещение. Наш офис в данный момент находится на ремонте. Вот, то есть у нас есть большой офис, который уже 3 года находится на основном ремонте.
Вы чем занимались до этого?
Я не считаю это необходимым, как бы сейчас. Я работала в компании «Инфоспорт», которая занималась, которая занималась реализацией этих игровых площадок. То есть они вообще абсолютно не относятся к Kazakhmys. Я в компании Vertex работала.
Vertex работала, то есть с Jumanbayev.
Да, с Jumanbayev.
Хорошо. Ну, я вам приглашаю вам интервью сделать. Мы можем сделать интервью на камеру?
Я думаю, нет.
Чтобы все было открыто. Ну, поговорим о экологии, потому что было нарушение экологии.
Это не может быть нарушением. Смотрите, завод не наш. Мы только управленцы. Поймите сами, мы только управленцы.
Не мы же экологию портим, а машины, которые находятся на заводе, правильно?
Да.
Которые
Владельцы, то есть те, кто должен был это регулировать. Вот и все. Разговор в этом. Я понимаю, если бы это было наше предприятие, мы были собственниками этого завода, и тогда претензия была бы к нам. Почему мы в плохом состоянии содержим завод? Мы его взяли в аренду.
As the senior representatives of Omega Trading, it's odd that there aren't any pictures of these women at the reopening of the Shymkent plant. Kazakhmys were there. But it's not just us that think Kazakhmys was actually in full control of the smelter. The Environment Minister says Omega Trading was a subsidiary of Kazakhmys. And the South Kazakhstan regional governor states that Kazakhmys was in full control of the finances and production of the smelter during this period. I called John Smelt back. Hello, John.
Hello.
The problem was John was offering a private conversation, but we wanted to film an interview. What is the relationship between Omega Trading and Kazakhmys PLC?
Robin, on what basis are we talking now?
What environmental impact assessments did you perform ahead of supplying this material to the lead smelter?
Robin, unless we can have a sensible conversation.
So where can I find some answers? Kazakhmys is now a British public limited company. Perhaps the truth doesn't lie in Almaty or Kazakhstan, but in London, where Kazakhmys is now based. Kazakhmys was, until recently, a FTSE 100 company. It's now in the FTSE 250. It's still a big player in the London capital markets. And British pensioners, through their fund managers, have invested heavily in the company. Britain's Parliament passed the UK Companies Act in 2006, and all UK companies have to follow the rules wherever they operate. And that includes looking at their impact on the environment and on local communities. So any British company that got involved in the Shymkent operation should have carried out a study on the environment and reported its findings to its shareholders, as well as any earnings. And any director of a company that fails to carry out those requirements could be fined or even go to prison. Some insiders who advise the city on corporate governance believe that mining companies like Kazakhmys may have chosen the UK because it's an easy place to do business.
Well, quite simply, that the London Stock Exchange sets out to be more flexible and to accommodate companies that feel, for whatever reason, that they will fall short of the compliance standards that exist in New York. One of those is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is the long-standing U.S. regulation against corruption, which is applied fiercely by the U.S. Department of Justice.
Kazakh mining companies listed in London have already come under scrutiny. Global Witness campaigns for transparency in the natural resources industry.
Many investors are worried. Can we trust these companies? Do we have the full information about these companies in order to make an informed choice? With Kazakhmys, that's an open question.
The fact that they're listed here means that if they fail to be honest about what's going on and there's a financial liability, then something can be done about it.
There are requirements under the Companies Act that companies should perform environmental impact assessments, and this Kazakhmys and the involvement of Kazakhmys in the lead smelter should be examined, and to see whether the company has indeed fulfilled all its requirements under UK and international law.
Kazakhmys's involvement was limited to the smelter's final few years, and their time in Shymkent appears to have ended. Any pollution would only have added to an already toxic environment. But does that let them off the hook? Is it reasonable to assume that any company which knowingly supplied and operated a lead smelter must share some of the contributory responsibility, if not the moral responsibility?
I think they should, even if there aren't any statutory measures in place. To my mind, they would have a moral responsibility. And just because it's difficult to quantify the effects of what their industrial processing is doing, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't accept some responsibility for it.
It took decades during the Soviet era to build up this mountain of toxic waste. But whatever extra pollution resulted from the partnership between Amega Trading and Kazakhmys is hidden. So working out how much their operation affected the people of Shymkent and their environment is difficult. And that is the challenge facing any future legal action. But the children of Shymkent do have rights. In cases like this, local people may be entitled to reparation from the globalized firms that use places like Shymkent as a dumping ground. And that would have consequences for both the firms and their shareholders.